right. I think I know most of you in here. Some of you, most of you. I know everybody but you in the back.
Hello.
Yeah, that makes you. So I may never see you again. I don't know where you came from. So I'm probably just going to stare at you the whole time because I have to like face all of these people.
I'm sorry.
So where's everybody from? Are you guys, I mean, I know most of you, but where are you from?
Me?
Yeah.
In Carmine, Illinois.
Okay.
Clark County.
That's kind of a haul. That's cool. How'd you get connected to come into this?
Long story short, Danny's like, get over here. So
Okay. You were personally recruited then. All right. So I don't know how everyone feels about these topics, but in the course of trying to decide how to break down two giant topics into a 30-minute time frame, we're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty if that helps everybody kind of relax their nerves just a little bit. We can't talk about sexual immorality for 30 minutes. I mean, we can, but that doesn't leave you with a lot of tools to address it either. And we can't talk about sexual abuse in 30 days and cover everything that we need to cover without also leaving people without a lot of tools. And I'm a trauma therapist, so like you don't get into things that you can't help people fully process through. That's not great for the rest of your day. So I am going to try to make this work. Navigating hard topics as Christians, that's why we're all here. That's who I am. It's not that exciting.
Yeah.
All of the letters that Danny was nice to point out. He makes it sound like I'm much smarter because of those letters than I am. But
She's lying. She's very, very smart.
they all mean relatively the same things. I am a mental health therapist, and I specialize in working with sexual offenders, kids who have been sexually offended on, people with sexually reactive behaviors, sexual trauma, human trafficking, all of those kinds of things that come into sex-related trauma therapy. So that is why I got to start talking about this topic with you guys. So the main things that we're going to talk about today is sex via sexual immorality and sex via sexual abuse. So when I first bring up these topics, one-on-one with clients, in my groups, when I'm talking to people, I like to always take a little pause and kind of see, as you start to hear these words for the first time, how does everybody feel? Like, what are your thoughts when these things come up? Are you guys comfortable? Are these topics you're comfortable with?
It makes me sad.
Okay.
Growing up, the word sex was always like a curse word to me, so like I like cringe whenever I hear it.
Exactly.
But
yeah, we are definitely conditioned to think of the word sex, sexual immorality, sex, sexual abuse as like a dirty word. And I think especially as Christians, this encompasses a lot of areas that we focus on seeing sin. And so we just don't talk about it. We don't accept it. We don't acknowledge that it exists. We throw it right in there with like murder and thievery and all of these things, which means that we're also not well educated on how to address it. We're not well educated on how to prevent it. And we're also not very comfortable in being that good support system to people who have experienced it. So that's kind of the focus today. Try to get past the embarrassment, the anger, being scared, fearful, feeling judged, or feeling like you're judging others. That's always a problem when you're talking about it. The anxiety that comes with it, and then for a lot of people, it's disgust. It's a topic that if we have to talk about kids being sexually abused, that is not something that everybody's brain is really prepared to talk about. We pretend like it doesn't happen. We shut down the conversations when we're supposed to be accepting that it's happened or happening or preventing it to happen because it's scary and it's awful and it's not a thought that most of our brains have ever gone to, so it's very uncomfortable. But in doing that, we're avoiding the scary words and we're avoiding the scary topics and we're avoiding the scary feelings that do exist whether we talk about them or not. So why do you think people are scared to talk about it? As Christians, why are you scared to talk about it? Why does it make you feel scared? Why does it make you feel sad?
I think there's a lack of understanding on how to like properly appreciate sex in general.
Okay.
And so it becomes taboo, and then especially having kids or with kids around where the line is to, you know, encroach on that topic, or when it's inappropriate.
I think we've been told our whole lives. Go ahead.
I think like sexual.
Come on in.
Sorry.
Come on in. No, you're fine. Hi, guys. Sorry. No, you're fine. You're not. You haven't missed much.
It's all right, she made it.
Go ahead.
I think like especially with people with like sexual abuse and stuff, there's like having a conversation with someone like that, there's nothing you can say that makes that feeling go away or like makes like that what happened to that person go away. So sometimes having those conversations with those people is just hard because you don't really know what to say to them, and there's nothing really to say sometimes. And so as like a Christian, it's like you care so much and feel so much for that person that sometimes saying nothing is just better than saying something.
I think that's really valid. We're scared to address the topics because the topics are, again, something that we're not well informed about. We don't talk about it very often. We feel really uncomfortable when we do talk about it. It does encompass a lot of what we understand as being sinful behavior, sexual abuse and sexual immorality. It's sin across the board in a lot of different ways, no matter which angle you're coming at it from. And so as we sit down and we have these really vulnerable conversations with people, we have to reflect on ourselves and what that means for us as well. If there was any of that in your past, or if you know someone that has experienced that in their past, or if you have had no experience with it, you're uncomfortable. It makes you vulnerable. It makes you really see the world for what it is. And so now we're like head on, face to face, having conversations about the devil's work, which is scary. It's a lot easier as Christians to talk about God, all the good things he does, and all of the blessings, and all of the grace and the forgiveness, and all the fruits of the Spirit, and all of the Bible verses that lift us up. And when we also have to take all of that Jesus and apply it over the top of what's happening in the world that's coming directly from the enemy, that doesn't feel as good. That doesn't feel as cushy and as comfortable. And so I think we avoid it for those reasons.
I think too, like for you, like you're different than the rest of us because like it's what you do, you know, like people come to you for these things, but like us, like like as Christians, like on this side of things, like I'm just, you know, one example, but like I mean I almost have a teen boy, but I also work with like teenagers like all day long. So as a parent and as like I guess like a Christian mentor, you know, like all my kids at school know that I do first priority and this and that, but it's uncomfortable for me because of like I feel like, you know, when they start talking about this, all of those kids are different backgrounds, and so it's hard to like make like a like I guess like a solid, you know, like line of like how to address them all, because like some of them have parents who have touched on this stuff. Some of them, believe it or not, have parents that are like, oh yeah, like here's a condom, like it's fine, don't get pregnant.
Yeah.
And like that's not ideal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have been raised in this church, and I do think like the older I get, the more I realize that I'm not like like speaking like you know anything bad, but like we did a poor job of addressing it.
Yeah.
I mean, I went through confirmation class here, and they were like, you know, here's a promise ring, wear it to yourself, like try not to have sex until you're married. And that was really the end of it.
Right.
There was no, you know, like why is it a good thing? There was no talks like that, and had maybe like I had. Some, you know, it wouldn't be so awkward now.
Yeah.
You know? But I don't know.
So if we're gonna avoid having sex until we're married, we have to say the word sex so many times to explain all of the temptations and all of the things that are gonna come against you that you can prepare yourself for, and also all of the things that you cannot. You don't know what somebody's gonna say to you, what somebody's gonna try to do with you or to you. You don't know what's gonna pop up on TV. You don't know what this song is gonna say until you listen to it. And we don't know where these things are gonna begin to creep in until we've experienced them. So if we wanna accurately talk to our kids, especially teenagers, about it, you have to talk about all of the things. So now, I not only have to have a sex conversation with you, I have to have 15 conversations about sexual things with you, and I'm not even comfortable saying the word sex one time. So if I'm uncomfortable saying it, you're uncomfortable hearing it, you know, as a teenager. Like, it's uncomfortable
I
to
just
hear
wish
your
there was
parents
like
go,
more Christians who would step up and be like, I'll do it. Like, let me talk to you about it. Because like I remember being a teenager and like there was no way in heck I was gonna go to my parents and be like,
I'll talk to y'all's
You-
kids
you
about it.
know what I mean? Like-
Like,
you know?
Yeah.
And so like who is supposed to do that? Like as like a mentor at church, you know, should you I don't know, your
I feel
youth
like the
group leader,
church
it's
has
like,
a major role in being able
we
to
do,
that.
and I don't think we
Yeah.
do a very good job at addressing
Because
it.
this should be a
because it's
safe
hard.
place for all the topics. All of the topics, we should be able to come to church and have them, and they should be easier to have with our church family than probably our actual biological families, because that's weird. Nobody wants to accept that this is like a thing that we're gonna talk to our parents about, or that I have to talk to my kids about. But as a church, we have a moral responsibility to help kids and adults get to the best possible place that they can be in, to be as close to Jesus as they can be. And so if we lock all of this stuff into the dark, what's in the dark can't come to the light. Jesus is the light, and we have just cut him off from the conversation. So we've immediately pulled out the biggest resource that we have to support the group that is the next generation to start the change. Did you have something you want to say?
Handle it.
Okay, all right. We're like working as a team here, all of us. So sexual immorality and sexual abuse are intertwined topics that I feel like get braided together, and they aren't supposed to be. They are not the same topic. And the problem that you find is that they both have the word sex in them, and that's a scary topic, as we've all said, right? Sexual immorality is not the same as sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is something that happens to someone, and sexual immorality is something that we do. When we start to lump everything that starts with or has the word sex in it, we're now not only not having conversations about behaviors and the behaviors that we have or the behaviors that other people have and the things that are sin and sinful, but we're also cutting off the conversation for victims who don't know how to navigate that as Christians, or who want to be Christians or would be Christians if they didn't have this giant boulder in front of them. So we've taken something that makes you feel very un-Christ-like, because you have been sinned upon. You have been the victim of sin. You feel broken. You've already had sex before marriage. Even if non-consensual, you've had sex before marriage, right? Or you've been touched inappropriately. In some way, you're no longer the pure version of yourself that we are, as Christians, often raised to believe that we should be and will be. We tell kids, if somebody tries to touch you, you tell them no. You don't let anybody touch your private parts. You don't get a choice always. And so if this has happened to me, the narrative that I've been told my whole life is, one, we're not supposed to talk about these things. Two, you're not supposed to let anybody do this to you. And three, you're never supposed to have sex or any sexual things before marriage. I've messed up 3 big times and I had no control and no say-so in any of it. So how do I come to my Christian family? How do I come to my church family and say, I'm broken and I've sinned. All of this has got to be sin because it's about sex. And sex is a sin before marriage. But that's not what that's intended to be. So we have to do a better job as Christians of disconnecting those two things. Sexual immorality and sexual abuse. We have to address both of them Both of them have to be addressed with love, support. We have to be able to be informed on how to handle and have these conversations, which I think that's what we're all learning today, how to have the hard conversations. But we also have to be able to recognize that as the victim of sexual abuse, you probably feel as guilty, shameful, embarrassed as a person who's has a pornography addiction. You've experienced all of the same sins, even without having any ability to like have your own control over that. And so at that point, whose job is it to come in and say, like, you are not broken. Jesus loves you. Who does that? It has to be the church. So sexual immorality. Sexual immorality is a noun. Sexual abuse is a verb. Sexual immorality refers to any kind of sexual acts that aren't socially acceptable. So in our Christian world, we're talking about pornography. We're talking about adultery. We're talking about watching R-rated movies, listening to music that has very explicit sexual content in it, which in today's day and age, like, you can say anything, absolutely anything, and it goes on the radio anyways. And we got to talk about gay marriage. We got to talk about homosexuality. It slips all into those gender issues. There's a lot of things as Christians that we are going to throw into a big bucket of sexual immorality. The Bible calls anything that is sex outside of marriage as sexual immorality. So if you grow up learning this, you're sexually immoral if you're sexually abused. And we have to rewrite that understanding, because that isn't at all how the Bible interprets it or what it says. But that's how we teach it. We teach that sex outside of marriage is immoral. So if you have sex out of marriage, again, against your will, non-consenting, children, you're sexually immoral. And how do I show up at church on Sunday? And how do I get saved? And how do I get baptized? And how do I pray and worship and trust in God if I'm already immoral at a deep, deep level that I don't know how to correct myself? In any other circumstance where you feel like you've sinned, you'd probably go to your pastor. You'd probably go to church leaders. You'd probably go to church friends. You guys would probably talk in your youth groups, talk in your small groups. Hey, these things are happening in my life and I'm kind of struggling with them. I can't quit cussing. I drink a little bit too much. Like, I'm having a hard time, like, giving up some of these movies and some of these songs. And, you know, we fight too much. I say mean things to my wife. I say mean things to my husband. I feel like I shouldn't discipline my kids the way that I do. We'll talk about all of these things. And we're happy to talk about them until it's something deep, something that will ruin your ability to connect with anybody, but most importantly with God. Sexual abuse. Let's see if we can get it. There we go. It's a verb. It's a thing that happens. Sexual immorality is on the part of the person who's the abuser. They've had sexual immorality by abusing somebody else. Sexual abuse is something that happens to someone. They're a victim. And in the Bible, Deuteronomy, sexual abuse is actually addressed in several different places. But this specific passage, you guys can go through and read the whole story that it is part of. But it really points out that the perpetrator of the sexual abuse is at fault, and the Bible doesn't look at a victim of sexual abuse as having sinned or being part of sexual immorality. It sees them as a victim, and we're called to love and care for those who have been victimized. And we don't share that as a church. We don't say, this isn't part of sexual immorality. This isn't part of sex before marriage. This is not part of saving yourself and innocence and purity. Yeah, it all ropes in together, right? We have to talk about it. We have to address it. We have to get you back on track. We have to find you peace. We have to heal your trauma. We have to build your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-confidence, attachment, bonding. All of these things are destroyed by sexual abuse. But what we don't talk about is that what has happened to you isn't a sin that disconnects you from God. In fact, he weeps with you. He's seeing you as a victim, and he's supposed to be sending us. He is sending us. We are supposed to be responding to being sent to be the light in those dark places. And I think like you said, we don't necessarily talk about it. I think we don't talk about it because it's shameful. I think we have a lot of guilt about our own choices, whatever those choices may be. If you watch a movie that has too many cuss words in it, or you watch a movie who has content in it that you don't feel good about, that doesn't align with biblical views, you may have a little guilt in talking to somebody else about, hey, you might want to kind of like avoid this movie, avoid this artist. I listened to the whole thing and it's not quite where we want to be, but you go home and you watch it every night. Like, that's not a conversation that as a Christian you're going to feel comfortable having, because that's hypocritical, right? So we have some sexual immorality in all of our lives. Every single person in this room does, whether we realize it or know it or not, because it is very difficult to go anywhere in the world and not experience some amount of sexual immorality. You can't turn on the radio, you can't put on a movie, you can't go into a restaurant, try to watch the Super Bowl, you can't do anything. You're gonna be exposed to it. You can't go to Walmart and not at some point turn around and see someone wearing something that you're like, okay, well, these are things that I probably shouldn't be looking at, but where's your pants? You know, we are exposed to a very, very sexually driven world, and we avoid it, and we pretend like it doesn't happen, and we don't talk about it. So we're all going through it together, and nobody is talking to each other about it. Why do you guys think we have shame? Where does the shame come from? What's shameful about talking about sex?
Well, to me, sorry.
Nope, either of you, both of you.
I'm a teenager.
Okay.
That's essentially it. I'm a teenager and I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
Nor do I want to hear about it,
Especially
or
from,
see about it.
Especially from like your
But,
parents.
yeah.
It's a little awkward.
When
Okay.
it gets really weird is when it's from fellow teenagers.
Okay.
Then it's
Yeah.
like, oh,
You're like, oh, I don't really want to hear about that.
say talk about that kind of thing.
Okay. So they're talking about their sexual experiences, and you guys are being exposed to those conversations.
It's just weird.
Uh-huh. It is weird.
Only way to put
All
it.
of this is weird, and now I'm staring right at you, and that's weird too, right? So you're exposed to these things. It's part of your life. It lives in your brain. If I told you a story about sex, you know that now, and it's logged into your brain. So if we're not supposed to think about these things because they're so dirty and they're so scary, the easiest thing to do is just completely avoid it. Like, run from it like we're being chased by a tiger. I don't want it in my brain. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to consider that this is a problem. So when it sneaks up on you, you're completely unprepared. You don't have a game plan. I don't have a game plan for going into Walmart and not wanting to be exposed to the things I'm exposed to, unless I do. I don't have a game plan for trying to watch a new Marvel movie and trying to decide, is it appropriate or is it not appropriate? As of late, not so much.
Because we avoid it because we're guilty of sinning.
That is that's my biggest opinion. I think we're all guilty. We're all guilty to some extent. I've watched something and it got a little iffy and I kept it on because it's season 2 and I watched all of season 1 and I just want to know what happens. And so when Danny gets up and he talks about not sinning and being moral, maybe not just sexual morality, but morals, what do you think the first thing that pops in my mind is? I knew better. I know better. Do I want to go home and watch it next Thursday when it comes on? I do. I love this show. Why did they have to put that in there? But the thing is, it is in there. And if I don't address it and I don't have maybe a community addressing it as a church, we're all on the same page of, yeah, this stinks. It stinks that we can't watch whatever it is that we want to watch. But as a group, we're kind of on the same page because we've discussed it. We've discussed that there's some bad things in there that lead to some other things. And that if you're willing to do this, then the next time you're willing to do this, and the next time you're willing to do this, and before you know it, you're doing this over here. And now I don't want to go to church on Sunday because I just am not feeling very close to God, whether I am consciously realizing it or not. Every little piece of sin puts space between you and God. And you can't live in the dark and have Jesus. He's the light. So if where you're at is dark, you've lost it. You've lost that connection. You've lost that relationship. And the same goes for becoming like a Christian onion. Like, I am going to avoid it. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to avoid people who talk about it. I am not going to this, and this. And now I have all of these layers, and I got my Jesus, and it's just super bright in there. But it's dark all around me. I'm not sharing him with nobody. You can't get out. I've just wrapped him into a big ball. That's not helpful either. We're not called to save ourselves. We're called to make disciples. We should be saving ourselves, but we're not going alone. We're not in this alone. If we're supposed to be alone in this, why do we have a church? Why do we have a building? Why do we need to come together? Why do we have small groups? Why are there supposed to be 2 or more gathered? Why can't we just hang out on our own and do the thing? Because we are supposed to pour into each other. My Jesus comes out, spreads to y'all. Your guys' comes out and spreads to me when I need it, or when I don't need it, when I just want it. We're all leading by example. So we can't onion ourselves up either. We have to talk about the things. So what conversations are you guys avoiding out of shame or guilt? Which I heard him ask also, and I promise you I did not run up here and include this in mine because he's smarter than me thinks he is, but this was already in here. I don't like talking about adultery. I cheated a long time ago. My friend needs support, but I'm not going there. Can't tell my kids they're wrong for what they watch. I'm watching it too. So if I bring this up, they're going to know I was sexually abused also. If I ask him about sexual abuse, I have to hear about his sexual abuse story, and that's too hard. I don't know what to say. And the scariest one is those types of stories don't belong in church. If they don't belong in church, where do they belong? How do we fight the devil out of church? How do you fight sin out of the church?
I think one of the things about it being taboo is sometimes there's almost good reason. So like, I have kids. If somebody was to say, like, I want to talk to your kids about sex, my first instinct is like, red flag. But I mean, like, in a way, rightfully so, but it's also needed. So like, the qualifications of somebody to talk about that. So like, I guess speak to even what you do is like, thank God for it, because like, it matters that one, you're qualified and you have like skin in the game of something to lose if you don't handle it properly. Because you don't want to just have anybody and everybody come talk to your kids about something and you're not there. And in one way you shouldn't be there because that helps, but another way it's dangerous. Right? Like, yeah. I mean,
it is dangerous to talk about it, and it's scary and hard, and there is probably a good way versus a bad way to talk about it. I think the scarier thing is if we don't talk about it at all, though.
Right.
If I misspeak in telling your kids age appropriately, I mean the ages of your kids, that conversation is going to be, nobody is supposed to see your body, and you're not supposed to be showing your body to anybody unless it's your mom or your dad for a specific reason and you need help with something, or it's a doctor and your mom and dad's going to tell you before you go to that doctor that it's okay today because of this reason. And if any of those things are to happen, or anybody tries to have those conversations with you, even your friends, right? We don't ever tell our kids. We say, don't let other adults, don't let these big scary adults come and touch your no-no squares. Kids are perping on other kids at a rapid, wild rate.
Yeah. Because
Kids who are sexually abuse. They do. And there's a lot of statistics out there that'll just pound it that kids who are sexually abused won't always perpetrate on others. Kids who sexually abuse. They learn that that is behavior that's acceptable. And even if they know that it's wrong, they do it because they don't want to be the only one. They're trying to be normal. And they feel abnormal. Because there's this big thing that we don't want to talk about that's happened to them, and nobody will talk to them about it. Therapy is amazing for kids who have been sexually abused because now we can talk about it. They're normal. It's normal. They're not the only people who've ever been sexually abused, and they're not going to have to carry it by themselves anymore. But as a church, as parents, as Christian families, we're also able to take that a step further and say, there are things that are scary and hard to talk about. You can talk to me about it. If you don't want to talk to me about it, you can talk to Pastor Danny about it. You don't want to talk to Pastor Danny about it, you can talk to Miss Karen about it. You want to talk to Jake about it, you want to talk to Aaron about it. If you want to go talk to Grandma and Grandpa about it, if you have questions, or if anybody says anything to you that makes you uncomfortable, if you just want to write it down and just, give Mom and Dad a letter and you can go hide, and we don't have to talk to you right to your face about it until you're ready. But it's okay to have the conversation. It's okay to tell me if somebody did something that made you uncomfortable. It's okay to tell me if you see something on TV and it's scary and it's weird and you don't understand it. But you shouldn't go ask somebody else about it. You should ask some of these people. And it doesn't have to just be, you have to ask me. Like, you can't go ask my husband because he's not a sex therapist. You gotta ask me. He would love that. He would love if no one ever asked him any of these questions. He does not understand my job and thinks it's so weird. But we have to have that open conversation. We have to be able to go to our teenagers and say, hey, I know what you hear. I know what's happening at school. I know the jokes that are being made. I know the music that you're being exposed to. I know the movies that you're seeing. I know the friends that you hang out with, and I know what they're doing. I know that in health class they keep trying to give you guys condoms. Cool. You don't have to take them. That's fine. I can't change any of that. But what I can change is the conversation I'm having with you. So what are your questions? And do you want to ask me them, or do you want to ask somebody else them? And who can you ask about them? It's a conversation. And again, as parents, it doesn't have to be a conversation with just you. There are other people, and they don't have to be trained to be able to say, it's okay. It's okay to hear the things. You're going to hear the things. You hear it on the outside, and we got Jesus on the inside. And we just stick with what we know is right. And no matter what the rest of the world is doing, we're leading by example. You are the light. You, as my child, are spreading the good news, and you're spreading the light of Jesus. And that's not going to line up with the world, and it's not going to be the same. So even if everybody else in this entire high school is doing one thing, Jesus is that's what we're doing. We're following the Bible, and we're following what the Bible says is moral and ethical and acceptable. And if that gets hard, or you don't know where that line is, it's okay to talk about it, and we'll figure it out. And it's okay for you to not know. Because I didn't used to know, and maybe I still don't know. I'm parenting 14-year-olds for the first time. I'm going to parent 15-year-olds for the first time when they turn 15. It's okay for you guys to figure all of that out at the same time as your kids. A lot of us haven't done that before. If you're a grandparent, you've not grandparented kids that age, not that particular kid. We're all learning this as we go, and we have to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, loneliness, lack of knowledge, and spiritual disconnect are for sure where you're going to end up landing. If you are running from it, that avoidance part of it is dangerous, because it probably means that you also have a space in your past where it exists and you haven't dealt with it either. You haven't given that part to Jesus either. You don't need to avoid it if you've come to terms with your own sexual immorality or sexual abuse or whatever quivers you have about addressing those topics. I love this quote. If you're hysterical, it's historical. You don't necessarily have to be hysterical, right? But to be fearful, to be scared, there's a reason for that. We're not just scared of things for no reason. Like, babies aren't just scared of things. They'll touch anything hot. They don't know, but let it burn them one time. Are they going to touch it again? No, it's scary now. I've learned that it's scary. If sexual abuse is a scary topic for you, there's a reason why. Either you've been sexually abused, you know someone who's been sexually abused, you've maybe have a kid floating around out there that you feel like could be sexually abused. Maybe you know someone who's a sexual abuser. Maybe you've never had anybody have that conversation with you at all. So it's just foreign and uncomfortable for you. There's a lot of reasons. But if you don't address that, then you can't be the expert instead of the victim in the room either. So, part of that comes back to Jesus and the lady at the well. I think we have to be both in these conversations, right? We've all been at the well. We've all experienced some amount of sexual immorality on this very wide spectrum, right, of wherever it's at. You've either been the victim of it, you've been the perpetrator of it, or you've been exposed to it because you're a human who lives on earth, right? So it exists in your life no matter what. We're all the lady at the well. We're all the sinner. We're all the broken. We're all the person who's standing there at some point going, oh, I can't do this. You can't talk to, do you know who I am? Like, that's not for me. I think you might be looking for somebody else. And on that day, there for sure was some church leader somewhere chilling at home, nothing to do, who would have loved to spend the afternoon with Jesus, right? Like, he could have come over and spent the whole day, but he ends up at a well with a woman who the rest of the people around her wouldn't have been seen dead standing next to. Because she embodied a topic of sexual immorality that was super uncomfortable and shameful, and they avoided it, and it caused guilt. It was disgusting, it was scary, it was all of the things. But he went to her. He chose her. And in doing so, spread the gospel far and wide. If he had gone to the house of the church leader who didn't need to have that conversation, if he hadn't avoided it, we ready to move forwards? Almost there. How far would the gospel have spread? There would have been no new information shared that day. So there would have been no reason. So what have you been through? Are you the victim? Are you the expert? Building empathy is addressing these topics. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. We can't do those things if we don't go to the sources and we don't cover the topics. If there's someone that you feel is too broken, someone that you feel like thinks they're too broken for Jesus, are you approaching them? Are you including them? I have come to call the righteous. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. If we're only spending our time in church talking about church things that are already in the light, how are we reaching any of these people who need to be in the light but aren't? The hard conversations, we could have talked about that for a long time. Put it to work, discuss a movie, watch a movie, discuss a movie, put it out there. Hey, I went to watch this movie. It didn't have great things in it. If anybody else is, thinking about watching it, here's my take on it. Don't be afraid to say it. Decline a sleepover. Create a playlist, share it with your friends. There's a lot going on out there. It's really hard to find music. I have a whole playlist of things that are healthy. Find out what the signs of sexual abuse are. Talk to your congregation about it. Have really hard topics with your church leaders and your youth leaders and your youth who help with kids about sexual abuse and how easy it is to slip into situations that you didn't mean to slip into. Be very specific about what those things are so that they're aware of it. We also don't know what we're walking into if we don't know what we're walking into. So I don't know that this is going to be an issue for me because no one's ever brought it up until I ended up in that situation and made poor choices, and where am I now? And the last little bit of information is read your Bible and stick to it. Read your Bible and just stick to it. It's not wrong. And it's pretty clear, right? It can be a little hard to read, but a lot of these topics, specifically on sexual abuse and sexual immorality, it's pretty clear. We aren't to shun the people who have been abused. We're to seek them and pull them from that dark into the light. And we have the light because we have Jesus. Thank you, guys. Sorry, it was fast.